Who'd have thought that the saddest book that I'd read this year would have the words murder and Falcon in the title? Well, definitely not me. Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written and illustrated by Daniel Warren Johnson, the first issue of Murder Falcon was published by Image Comics in October of 2018, with the 8th and final issue being released in May of 2019. And Jake's having a rough time. He's got no band, no wife, and the Veldar are attacking Earth. Fortunately, with the power of rock, he can summon the Murder Falcon, a radical fighter with one mission: to stop Magnum Khaos. But what if Jake's personal battles are just too big to overcome? Jumping into the art section now, and Daniel Warren Johnson is the man. Straight out of the gate, it got the tone right because it was rough, but that was part of its charm. There's an 80s feel from the very first page, and I can't fully put my finger on why. Is it the hairstyles, the setting, the clothing, or just some combination of all of it? Energy seems to be the biggest thing about this book, and the reason why I had such a good time with this style. The big action scenes were frantic, emotional conversations knew exactly where to place the characters, and exposition was done in a way that didn't feel dull. Early on, there's just one page that touches on the key moments of Jake and Anne's relationship. There's no words, and it's never more than one panel for a moment, but each one gave you just enough so that you knew exactly how you were meant to feel. It was really powerful. It reminded me of the beginning of Up, mainly because some of the tragic stuff that happens are kind of the same. On top of that, this might be one of the best examples of illustrating music. Let's just be honest, because sound is one of the toughest senses to convey across a printed page, especially because I'm not against licking a book. Sure, yeah, sound effect might be able to do the trick, but to be able to get rhythm and tempo and even volume in some instances to all work together is a feat that I just can't overlook. And yeah, that was probably the main thing that Johnson had to get across, but he did it well, and I think it deserves respect for that. And just in general, the scope was phenomenal. You've got bridges that stretch for miles, ocean liners carrying thousands of containers, and that's even before I start talking about the weird supernatural stuff. The Heavy was one of my favourite locations, and I wish that we could have spent more time there. It's so tongue-in-cheek and obviously dumb that it manages to come back around to being a really tense and atmospheric location. And I feel like that was the motif for the entire story, that what on the surface might have looked goofy did carry a lot of meaning and emotion. And I think that's why it's a different experience when you read a comic that both the art and the story is done by the same person. It's that feeling that nothing's been lost in translation and that everything on the page is exactly what Daniel Warren Johnson wanted. And I think the reason why I preferred the otherworldly locations, even though I do still think that it might have been set on Earth, is because Johnson's style can often lack a bit of background detail. And yeah, it is due to it having that rough, sketchy quality. But when you're in the middle of the city, yeah, there might be a lot that's going on in the background, but not as much as when you're in the Heavy. And that's not me saying that the city scenes are bad, because they're great and there's still a ton of work that's clearly gone into them, but I just found myself lingering on the non-realistic locations a little bit more. And of course it helps when you've got this beautiful deluxe edition to look at, but that's where one of my only real gripes comes in. The title. Look at this. At first glance, and especially if you don't know that this series exists, all people are gonna see is the word murder because it's in blue foil. But guess what isn't in blue foil? The word Falcon. The word Falcon's actually even obscured by some of the characters. So if you read this in a public place or during your break at work like I did, be prepared for some people to give you questionable glances. And if anybody does decide to call you out on it, you can just tell them that they can pick up this book for themselves from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF, ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below, and you can use these codes as many times as you like. Now I'm jumping into the story section, and I cannot stress this enough. You can't judge this book by either its title or its cover. So I knew it wasn't just this wacky love letter to rock with some Brock Lesnar looking Falcon thrown into the mix, but I was still caught by surprise by some of the moments in this. Don't get me wrong, it does still have that goofy, almost spoof level of self-awareness that's put the words murder and Falcon together and gone, yeah, that's the title, no further questions. So it did scratch that itch of tickling the absurd with its sense of humour, but it's not just that, and it might be easy to look at a book with this title and go that yeah, it's probably going to be a bit of a joke, but it's not. And because of me thinking that that's all this was at first, I wasn't prepared for this to really hit me in the feels. If you're going through a bit of a bad time personally, then do not read this. There's a ton of beautiful moments in this, but I just don't think that it's going to cheer you up, because it touches on the meaning of life and how fragile it is, the importance of friendship, never giving up on your dreams, and this great range of deep subjects that the majority of comics steer away from. And it's crazy how Johnson managed to do that with just 8 issues. because there's quite a lot in this that still feels fully fleshed out. The only exception to that, which I will say now before continuing to gush about this book, is unfortunately Murf. I get the feeling that it was deliberate to not give us a ton of his history so that he could still be a bit mysterious, but he doesn't feel as integral to this as I would have hoped, especially considering that he's the title character. Every panel that he was in was great and he talked like some kind of Tekken character, so I was not gonna love him and want to see more. I also just liked how direct he was and how he could often lighten up a darker moment. And in the early issues he is very front and centre, but that becomes less and less as the book goes on. And I get that he's the mentor, and the more that Jake knows about the Veldar, the less that he needs Murf, and that actually isn't as much of a crime as it might sound because Jake is a really lovable protagonist. Johnson did a great job of using that technique that I only really like in small doses by starting this book with a flash forward, and he didn't do it in every single issue like something like Kill or Be Killed, but it gave the opening this energy and chaos it needed to live up to the title, and then realised that after that, when you've already got people hooked, you can begin to dial it back. Had it just started with Jake being down in the dumps and having that be the very first page that we open this book to, I feel like it wouldn't have been able to pick up as much momentum. And Johnson did a great job of making me pity Jake with it still feeling quite natural, because when I went back to the Killing Joke the other month, they made the mistake of just making the origin story too traumatic, to the point where you kind of doubt that all that stuff would happen at the same time. And I like that that wasn't the case with Murder Falcon, and he did a good job of only telling me what I needed to so that there was some interesting switch ups as the book continued. And Jake was kind of the every guy because he means well, he tries to do right by people, and he has made some mistakes in the past, but he owns up to them, and he felt like a fleshed out, realistic character by the end of issue 1. And there's a lot of great characters in this. Johan was a fantastic support, and I particularly liked his introduction and that awkward tension that he had with Jake. And this might make me a bit of a hypocrite, but at least I'll be in the right place on the internet, but I kind of wish that Murf would have been one of the only hero characters. And I just think it was a bit too quick at throwing these other fighters in, and because Johan and other characters don't really ever take centre stage, the other fighters just feel a bit there. None of them really seem to have a personality that's even on a similar level to Murf. They felt like NPCs that they just hadn't really written much dialogue for. I think as well it dampened the arrival of my favourite character, Hjelmdar, and I know that's probably not the right way to say it, but in all honesty I've been trying for about the last 5 minutes and I can't really be bothered anymore. This guy burst into the book, dominated the issues that he was in, and left without looking back. No offense to Jake, but why the fuck was Hjelmdar, and yeah, I'm only doing one take of that, that's all I've got, not the main character? So tying it back, if they hadn't already revealed that there were other fighters beyond just Murf, this would have massively changed the dynamic when he arrived. Again, at least it did feel like he was a fully fleshed out character, complete with his own band, and as a kid growing up with a kiss-obsessed dad, I absolutely loved his aesthetic. And now it all managed to add to the history of this battle against Magnum Khaos. The flashback with his band was one of my favourite moments in this book, and on the slimmest of slim chances that Daniel Warren Johnson ends up watching this, please give them a spin-off. He was not nearly in this enough, and they could have reduced some of those other moments that didn't really add to the overall story and just given us more time with him. But that guy who looks like his parents fell asleep on the keyboard when they were naming him actually pointed out one of the biggest strengths of Murder Falcon. It was just phenomenal at explaining the lore in a way that didn't feel tedious. Sure, Murf's idiosyncrasies helped, like I could just read dialogue of him narrating paint dry and I'd probably still find it funny, but again it knew just how much to reveal to give me a clear enough context without ever straying away from the action for too long. And I touched on this in the art section, but the use of music and the way that it could make me hear certain songs was really impressive. There was a soundtrack that I heard whilst reading this, but it never gives you like an official track listing. The final battle had me playing Move Along by the All American Rejects, which I can't play in this video for copyright reasons. I heard Ozzy Osbourne's Bark at the Moon early on when Jake and Murf arrived on the scene, and I really hope that Johnson has plans for some kind of 90s follow-up with dance music and Jamiroquai hats, because in all honesty, that's the dream. But despite that, the message of the book is really forced and obvious, almost to like the level of a children's adventure story. And I get that this is tongue-in-cheek, but Johnson showed that he can do nuanced scenes really well. It almost felt a bit cringe with just how much it was drilling in that music's important when that was something that I understood from the very first issue. We wouldn't even have made a Falcon if there was no music, so I get it, it's important. And to touch back on the characters, it's not all good news because I really wasn't a fan of the drummer girl. And it goes back to what I'm saying, that they could have reduced the focus on some of those characters to give us a bit more time with the main ones. Like Murf, she seemed nice enough, but beyond being in the same band, she didn't seem to have as much of a connection with Jake as Johan did. So in the end, she was just kind of there. Her backstory was sweet, and her dad being ill made me sympathetic towards her, and I feel like they only brought her in this because they needed another member of the band and she could have this sad backstory, but overall her contribution to this book was quite minimal. And if I'm being honest, I feel like this had a great beginning, a fantastic ending, and just a middle. There's still great character moments in there, and we get Jake and Anne's relationship fleshed out, but after the band gets back together, it feels like there's a lot of waiting around for the plot to happen. It can't just be non-stop action, or this would be the comic equivalent of Jason Statham's Crank, but I did find myself wondering in the middle part if this was just going to be another one of those Image titles that was really great out the gates and then lost a lot of steam. Fortunately, it wasn't, but then again, I can't really talk about the ending of this book without jumping into spoilers. This is your final spoiler warning, so if you don't want anything ruined, skip to the final verdict. But why was Jake being bald the most surprising thing that's happened in comics for me this year? But when he ditches the wig off and is comfortable enough with who he is, just fuck, that was a beautiful moment. But that's when I realised that the wig was about an identity. It wasn't really who Jake was anymore. Unfortunately, his life has changed. So he was wearing that to be stuck in the past, to still think that he was this rock star. Whereas his actual reality is a lot more depressing than that, and something that he just didn't want to face. And I love that step by step he regained everything that he'd lost prior to the start of this book. First it was his love for music, then it was his band, then it was his wife, and finally he got back his confidence. Because even though the book is called Murder Falcon, it's not his story, it's Jake's. And I'm not sure if it was a bait and switch or just me being my usual dumb reader self, but the reveal that it was Jake that had cancer and not Anne really took me by surprise. When I jumped into this book, I thought that she might have died before it started, and I'm glad that she didn't because I really liked their relationship together. But considering that this was only 8 issues, the way they managed to pace those reveals was great. Now, the death scene, it was sweet, it was a fitting send-off, and in all honesty, if it would have been longer, I probably would have teared up. But unfortunately, it did feel a bit rushed. Now, I'm not gaslighting you, I am not afraid of admitting when I cry at stuff. I was very open about it during my Why the Last Man review. And I get it, there wasn't too much left to be said in that moment, and it was inevitable that Jake was going to die, but I think when a book does manage to make me cry, it goes into some kind of upper echelon of comics. And this fell just short of that. But considering the left turn that this took me down on this emotional route, it's as if Johnson thought that he had more pages than he actually did. So he decided to just cram all the goodbyes into one page, and it really suffered as a result. The final page itself is really nice, so I at least give it credit for that, and I like that Murf is there to guide him into the afterlife. And all things considered, they still get the final battle right. And it had so much more behind it because Jake wasn't just fighting this evil, but he was fighting his own battle so that he could live a bit longer, which just made it feel separate from all these usual super villain type battles that we're used to seeing. And I love that it subverted my expectations. Anytime a fight's happening in a book, there should always be a why for the character. And looking at it overall, I don't think you get a bigger why than the one that Jake had going into the final fight. This is my final verdict. And the comics medium is only limited by what the creators can bring to the page. Sometimes you assume you know exactly what you're gonna get before you get past that front cover. And a title like Murder Falcon made me think I'm gonna get some kind of satirical 80s story, but I've never been more happy to be wrong. In just 8 issues, Daniel Warren Johnson gave us a fleshed out world full of vivid characters and a fantastic story that often bounces between being ridiculous and heartbreaking. There's not too many books that manage to do that while still being coherent and enjoyable. I do think it suffers from having a weak main villain that's overshadowed by the actual battle that Jake's going through, and it does often skim over some of the more interesting aspects of this universe, which left me feeling like there was something missing in the middle. But this is one of the best examples that I've seen in comics of a short series that sticks the landing and delivers on its concept, while still making sure that it had surprises waiting for me throughout. Some 20+ issue titles can't even manage to do that, and I feel like I should have included this on my Where to Start Image comics. You can pretty much blast through this in one sitting because it comes very highly recommended with a decent score of 80%. Woof woof! So that's the video. It's the first time that I've filmed in a while, and I'm just glad that I managed to get this done. But until next time, just make sure that you stay safe and stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.